This is definitely the most intense horror movie of 2025. When a group of people fall into a strange space, where they are reincarnated infinitely, every night, the group has to face all kinds of deaths such as strange infections, terrifying killers, and monsters of unknown origin. Everyone's fear grows more and more in despair, and then they accidentally touch a shocking secret. Without further ado, let's find out about today's movie titled Until Dawn. On a deserted mountain road, Clover and a few close friends have just finished a 2-week self-sufficient trip. But before going home, they have one more thing to do. A year ago, Clover's younger sister suddenly disappeared after sending a video. The place where the video was filmed was the convenience store in front of them. Even though she knows that hope is very slim, she still doesn't want to miss any chance to find her sister. A friend in the group, Megan, suggested trying to summon spirits here to gather clues. Although everyone found this somewhat absurd, they still patiently agreed to try. They all held hands in a circle. Under Megan's guidance, the group seemed to really sense something approaching. It turned out to be a passenger bus that suddenly interrupted the summoning game. Clover entered the convenience store and went straight to the cashier. She showed the photo and asked the employee if she had seen the girl in the photo. The old man shook his head and said he had never seen her before, but insisted that the girl had gone missing. Clover was immediately surprised and then listened to him explain that there had been a lot of people coming to look for missing relatives recently. All of this had happened in the Glory Valley ahead. At that moment, Clover excitedly rushed out of the store. The group immediately got in the car and drove straight to the Glory Valley. Not long after, it started to rain heavily. The driver turned several times but still couldn't get through the mountain road. While everyone was arguing, the front of the car suddenly lit up. Behind them was still pouring rain, but in front of them was a clear blue sky. It was as if space was clearly divided by an invisible energy source. Megan saw a grave lying in the middle of the lawn, and a bad feeling arose in her heart. But the others didn't want to get wet in the rain, so they all walked into the magnificent wooden villa in front. Only Clover remained standing still. She felt that this rain was extremely strange. Reaching out to test it, she felt that it was completely different from ordinary rain. At that moment, a figure appeared in the mist in front of her, causing Clover to be stunned and immediately dashed straight into the rain. Her boyfriend Max saw this and shouted and chased after her. Meanwhile, the other 3 people who had entered the villa also discovered many abnormalities. In the middle of the hall was a giant hourglass. The curly-haired girl happened to flip through the visitor's book and was stunned to see Clover's sister's name appear dozens of times. Megan walked into the bathroom where the mirror was covered in dust and the faucet didn't drip a single drop. It was as if the place had been abandoned for a long time. The videographer wanted to capture every moment, but when he entered a bedroom, Abe discovered that the entire wall was covered with wanted posters, including a photo of Clover's sister. She was still wandering in the rain looking for her sister. Suddenly, a large hand reached out and pulled her back, revealing itself to be Max. He took her back to the mansion. The group began to share the strange things they had just experienced. Clover confirmed that she had heard her sister whispering in the rain. At that moment, Nina discovered that the hourglass had started to run backwards in time, even though no one had touched it. Suddenly, there was a loud noise outside. They ran out to see that someone was driving their car into the rain. The other person was standing still and not moving. The group became alert and quickly went back inside the house. Who knew what kind of crazy person would appear in this desolate place? But there was no phone signal. Some people decided to go down to the basement to find a landline phone for help. Under the light of the phone, they groped their way downstairs. Mac discovered a window on the wall, which was extremely unusual in a basement. Clover found a landline phone, but it still didn't work. On the contrary, Megan found a radio. Upstairs, Abe and his girlfriend were shivering from the cold, when they suddenly heard a loud slamming of the door. He curiously walked over to check. Nina waited for a long time but didn't see her lover return. Feeling that something was wrong, she tiptoed through the hallway. In the open light, Nina vaguely saw a figure in front of her. When she turned on the light and saw clearly, the scene in front of her shocked her. When the 3 people downstairs heard the noise and ran upstairs, Nina had already collapsed in a pool of blood. Max immediately warned everyone, and the 3 of them split up to find a place to hide. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. The guy grabbed the chair and suddenly rushed out to hit the masked man. But the man seemed unharmed. A fatal stab killed Max on the spot. Megan was trembling in the closet, her eyes wide open in horror as she saw the masked killer quietly approaching. Clover was hiding behind the door, grabbing the knife on the table and rushing towards the masked man. However, he seemed to not feel any pain. Knowing that she was no match, she turned and ran, her feet frantically rushing out of the room. She ran and ran, unconsciously rushing into the forest. In the misty fog, Clover saw a familiar figure. But before she could confirm it, a knife pierced her stomach, and she was stabbed to death by the masked man. At that moment, the hourglass began to spin on its own. Everything returned to the moment when they first entered the room. However, they still had memories of being murdered. What was even more bizarre was that their photos had also appeared on the wall along with other flyers looking for other people. At this point, everyone was in complete panic. Could it be that something was holding them here? Abe decided to drive away. But Nina thought it wasn't that simple. She remembered that the registration book had dozens of similar names. Obviously, those people had also gone through many loops. At that moment, there was another knock on the door. They carefully walked over to see and found that the main door was opening and closing automatically. Abe quickly blocked the door. Meanwhile, Nina was horrified to find that the hourglass had started counting down again. Megan's face was pale, and she was especially light on spirits. She sensed that something extremely unusual was approaching. As soon as she finished speaking, Megan's body began to convulse uncontrollably. The light bulb on the ceiling exploded amidst a terrifying scream. And Megan suddenly disappeared. When everyone found her again, she was floating in the air in a very strange position. Every time her finger pointed at a picture on the wall, her mouth would say a different sentence in a different tone. It was clear that Megan had been possessed by a series of spirits. Then there was a piercing scream. Her neck was twisted to one side, and when she fell to the ground, she stopped breathing. The scene sent a chill down everyone's spine. Fear welled up in their hearts. Were they about to experience another death? Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. Clover's face changed color. She recognized that it was her sister's voice calling for help. Although everyone thought it was just a knock caused by a spirit, no one could stop it. The outside was completely empty. Max was surprised to find that a small wooden hut had appeared in front of her at some point. In the next moment, Clover was lifted up by an invisible force and sucked in. She tried to crawl back towards everyone, but her body was completely out of control. Max inside the house was about to rush out to save his girlfriend, but Abe tried to stop him in every way. It was clear that Clover could no longer be saved. We should take this opportunity to leave quickly. But Max didn't listen at all. He opened the door and walked out without hesitation. Clover had woken up in the wooden hut. She looked around and saw that the room was full of strange masks. On the old TV, a news report about the mine collapse was playing. There was an old woman sitting on the sofa. She thought about leaving quietly first, but when she turned around, she found that the wooden door was locked. When she turned around again, the old woman had stood up. She stared at her and slowly said, "Either survive the night or become part of the darkness." Immediately after, she used both hands to push Clover down. When the oxygen mask was placed on her face, her eyes gradually turned deep black. Meanwhile, the old woman's body began to age rapidly until it turned into a pile of cold ash. A strange smile gradually appeared on Clover's face. Outside, Abe and Nina hurriedly jumped into the car. Neither of them had the mind to think about the others. He stepped on the gas and sped straight into the blinding rain. Unexpectedly, before they could go far, a large figure appeared in front of the car. Abe was so scared that he almost fainted and had to turn the car around to return to a safe area. Nina tried to open the car door to run, but found that the door was locked. A strong shower of blood spurted in and Abe was slashed to death on the spot. The masked murderer appeared again. Meanwhile, Max had already stepped deep into the hut. Apart from the pile of bones on the floor, he could not see Clover anywhere. He carefully observed the corners of the room when suddenly a clown appeared on the rocking chair. Max was startled and broke out in a cold sweat. But it turned out to be just an ordinary doll. He kicked it angrily and turned around to see Clover wearing a mask. In an instant, he was slashed to the ground by a knife. As she walked out of the hut with a cold expression, the killer clown drove towards her at high speed. Tragically, Clover was stabbed to death on the spot. The main group was once again completely wiped out. This time when they revived, they were more alert, sealed the main door tightly, and all huddled in the bathroom. According to the old woman, if they could last the night, they would be safe. Abe suddenly felt thirsty. Megan reminded him that there was no clean water here. But when he tried turning on the faucet, water actually flowed out. The group had not eaten or drunk anything all day, so they took advantage of the break to drink some water. Abe suddenly coughed violently, blood spurting from his mouth, and the cough became more and more severe. Megan tried to give him some water, but then he suddenly exploded into pieces. Everyone screamed in horror. Nina tried to wipe the blood off her body, but her body suddenly exploded into pieces. Only then did everyone realize that the water they had just drunk had something wrong. Megan was the third person to drink the water, and it was no surprise that her body also exploded into pieces. Clover saw through everything. This time they failed. They still had a chance to start over. Max in despair turned into a pool of blood, and in the end, Clover took the initiative to lie down and wait for death. Suddenly, a person appeared from the room. It was the convenience store clerk. She died in disbelief. When the hourglass began to slow down, everyone entered a new loop. They rushed to find clues. Clover discovered in the pile of papers that the clerk was actually a psychologist. The others found even more horrifying clues. This place used to be a prosperous town, but due to years of mining, the entire town had sunk underground. More than 1,000 people in the town were killed. The rescue team also had the psychologist. Max suddenly understood why there was a window in the basement. Nina curiously opened a door, discovered a tunnel leading straight outside, felt the cold wind, and quickly closed the door. Abe was lucky to find an old tape box, opened it and saw that it was a recording of a psychologist's experiment. He had locked a survivor in a secret space, creating constant despair and fear. The experimented person gradually changed from mind to body and after 13 days, completely turned into a monster. After watching, everyone realized that this was what they were experiencing. Clover immediately thought of a way to break the loop. They not only had to survive but also had to destroy that hateful psychologist. At this time, a deep laugh came from the radio. The voice kept praising Clover for being smart and sharp. If you want to meet the psychologist, you have to go alone in the forest. She rushed out of the house without hesitation. The rest wanted to follow but were stopped by Abe, saying that it was clear that only Clover was allowed to go alone. Max didn't care. If he died, he would do it again. He was about to say something when Nina used an iron rod to hit Abe. He was too nagging. Mac nodded and led Megan out. At this time, Clover had reached the small forest. She didn't pay attention to the animal trap on the ground. She was horrified to find that the animal trap was also locked with an iron chain. Immediately, an invisible force pulled her into the darkness. Meanwhile, in the house, Abe and Nina were waiting for news when they encountered the murderous clown. Their fate was obvious. On the other side, Max and Megan had reached the small forest, finally seeing part of the house buried in a dirt tank. Suddenly, a slight noise came from behind them. The two quickly hid behind the tree to observe carefully. Suddenly, a drop of mucus fell from above and a terrifying monster appeared. Max and Megan were scared and ran away. She unfortunately tripped and fell to the ground. She was horrified to find herself lying face down on a pane of glass. With just a little movement, the glass could shatter. Max reached out to save Megan, but the monster had already caught up. He watched helplessly as his teammate was dragged into the darkness by the creature. What no one expected was that on the other side, Clover was dragged away by a trap but did not die. Max happened to run into her. As he was about to remove the trap, a hideous monster stepped out of the darkness. Max quickly moved forward, using the trap to clamp the monster's head. However, Clover noticed the shape and, looking through the costume, realized that the monster was her younger sister in disguise. Even though she had hidden behind the protective fence, her mind was still not at peace. There was no doubt that this time they had failed because they had not even met a psychologist. Now the three remaining friends were dead. Clover thought that they had to start over again. She took a piece of glass and asked her boyfriend to help her end her life. After Max did as he was told, he found that the monster had already attacked. He quickly drank a few drops of rainwater and rushed out. But the next moment, his body exploded into a pool of blood. He didn't expect that rainwater could kill people. After another death and resurrection, everyone was much more sober this time. Fortunately, they still had quite a few resurrections. But when Abe revealed the lump on his back, everyone's expressions changed. Clover checked the list in the register. They had already gone through 13 nights. According to the videotape, this was their last chance. If they failed again, the group would turn into monsters and become part of the darkness. However, everyone clearly only remembered dying 4 times, and they might have lost some of their memories. Abe seemed to wake up and quickly took out his phone, which recorded other deaths. One time he was attacked by a mysterious parasite. Another time a giant death god appeared. The final scene stops at the psychologist. He looks around and then enters the tunnel behind the door. Then, Megan's face appears. She wants to follow in to find clues. At this time, everyone realizes that their friend is really missing. This was their only chance. Hiding and chasing was no longer meaningful. The group unanimously decided to find Megan and kill the psychologist. Passing through the narrow and dark tunnel, They saw a desolate ruin. Clover looked around and spotted a monster from afar. She quickly signaled everyone to be quiet. Unexpectedly, another monster suddenly rushed out. In the blink of an eye, the whole room became extremely chaotic. The loud noise attracted more monsters. Everyone quickly ran through the tunnel, finally using the isolation door to block the monsters behind. However, the murderous clown broke the glass door and rushed in. Max and the other two let Clover go first, while they together held back this cruel clown. She staggered through the rubble. When she fell, she was almost stabbed by the sharp blade. Clover stood up in fear and prepared to continue when suddenly the monster her sister transformed into appeared. Clover tried to awaken her sister's memory, but there was no response. She pushed the monster hard and the monster fell on a protruding iron bar. On the other side, the three of them were also fighting fiercely with the killer clown. This time they showed their determination, coordinated well, and finally killed the killer clown together. Meanwhile, Clover avoided one monster after another and finally saw Megan being held captive in the laboratory, with another chained monster nearby. It was clear that the psychologist wanted to increase the fear in her heart. When Clover was looking for the key, she accidentally entered the monitoring room, where her own documents were on the table. The psychologist walked in with a smug look and said that all the strange phenomena here were the incarnation of human fear. The residents who died in the disaster were the most powerful source of energy. After speaking, he put the coffee cup on the table. Clover saw the leak, and an idea came to her mind. When the psychologist is not paying attention, she quietly moved the cup to the exact spot where the water droplets fell. Hill was completely unaware, and continued to drink a few more sips of coffee. However, not long after, he sensed something was wrong. Clover used both hands to push hard, and the psychologist immediately disintegrated into pieces like rain. She bent down, found the key to the laboratory in the pool of blood, hurriedly opened the door, and finally saved Megan before the monster escaped from the iron chain. At this time, Max and the others were also being chased everywhere by the monster. Fortunately, the winding space here was wide enough. Everyone tried their best to run at full speed, and finally escaped at the last minute. Just then, the time in the hourglass ended, and everyone happily discovered a ray of dawn appearing beside them. The rain on the mountain road gradually cleared up. It seemed like they had completely broken the veil that hid the nightmare space. The group laughed and cried as they got in the car. But unexpectedly, after leaving this place, their figures appeared on the surveillance screen. And that was the entire content of Until Dawn. Thank you very much for your support so that the channel can develop like today. If you find it interesting, please give me a like and a comment about this movie. Especially, please subscribe to the channel to follow my latest movie summaries.